The building was always quiet at 6 a.m., but that morning, the silence felt different, charged, almost trembling, because destiny was about to shift without warning. A worn-out janitor with tired eyes and calloused hands stood in the marble hallway, speaking softly on the phone in fluent Dutch, unaware that someone important had stepped out of the elevator behind him and stopped mid-step, stunned by what he heard. It was the kind of moment that looks ordinary from afar yet carries the weight of an entire lifetime. And within seconds, everything this single father had fought for, feared, and hidden for years was about to come rushing to the surface. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and life-changing miracles, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Jonas had worked the early janitor shift at the corporate high-rise for almost 3 years. Every morning followed a routine that wrapped around him like an old, faded blanket: sweep the lobby, polish the elevators, scrub away the footprints of people who never noticed him. He kept his head down, stayed quiet, and lived with a kind of invisible dignity. Most days, people walked past without acknowledging his existence. And Jonas preferred it that way. Being unnoticed felt safe. It protected him from questions he couldn't answer and pasts he couldn't afford to revisit. But the only thing that broke his silence every morning was the short phone call with his 8-year-old daughter, Mila, before she went to school. She loved when he spoke to her in Dutch, the only connection she still had with the mother she lost too young, and the only piece of Jonas's old life he hadn't completely buried. He guarded those moments fiercely. It was the only time he allowed warmth to rise in his voice, the only time he wasn't invisible, because to Mila, he was everything. That morning, Jonas didn't notice the man who froze behind him, the sharply dressed Millionaire CEO, Adrian Vermeer, who had arrived early for a board meeting. Adrian didn't just understand Dutch, he recognized Jonas's accent, the structure of his sentences, the familiarity of his tone. It wasn't conversational Dutch. It was academic. It was polished. It was intentional. It was the voice of someone who once lived a very different life from the one he was living now. Jonas hung up, wiping the bit of emotion that had slipped into his eyes. He turned, and immediately stiffened when he saw Adrian standing there, watching him with a strange, unreadable expression. Jonas thought he was in trouble, that maybe talking on the phone during shift hours would get him written up or worse. But Adrian didn't look annoyed. He looked curious, almost shaken. And that was the moment when Jonas sensed the walls around his carefully built life beginning to crack. The millionaire asked if they could speak privately. The request felt intimidating, but something in Adrian's tone wasn't harsh at all, it was gentle, respectful, almost urgent. Jonas agreed, though his heart thudded painfully in his chest as they walked to a quiet conference room. He had secrets to protect. He couldn't afford mistakes. He couldn't afford hope either. Inside, Adrian's questions came slowly, carefully. He wanted to understand how a janitor spoke Dutch with the fluency of a university scholar. And little by little, hesitant, cautious, Jonas began revealing pieces of a life he once had but lost. He had been a linguistics researcher, with papers published in Europe. He had been working toward a doctorate. He had dreams. A family. A future. And then tragedy struck. His wife passed away, medical bills swallowed everything, visas became complicated, and he was left alone in a foreign country with a newborn daughter and no support system. Survival became his only priority. So he took whatever job he could get. And that job was cleaning floors in a building where no one would ever guess who he used to be. As Jonas spoke, Adrian felt something in his chest twist. This wasn't just a story of hardship. It was a story of brilliance buried under the weight of life's cruelty. Adrian didn't see a janitor anymore, he saw a man who had the intelligence and heart of someone who deserved far more than the world had ever given him. And he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he was meant to change that. Days passed, and Adrian kept observing Jonas quietly. He watched how Jonas treated everyone with patience and humility. How he worked extra shifts just to buy his daughter a better lunch. How he never complained. How he carried the quiet grief of someone who had lost too much but still chose kindness. Adrian felt a responsibility building in him, something deeper than charity or sympathy. It was the recognition of human potential, raw, powerful, and waiting for one chance to rise again. One afternoon, Adrian approached Jonas again, not as a CEO but as someone who believed in him. He offered him a position as a translator and cultural consultant for a major international project his company was launching. It was a job Jonas had once only dared to dream about. But Jonas hesitated. He wasn't afraid of working hard. He was afraid of failing, afraid of stepping back into a world where expectations were higher than he thought he could climb. Years of being overlooked had taught him to shrink himself. Adrian saw the fear and reassured him. He promised mentorship, training, flexibility, anything Jonas needed to find his footing again. After a long night of thinking, Jonas accepted. And in the weeks that followed, his life began transforming piece by piece. He traded his janitor uniform for a suit and ID badge. He entered rooms where people shook his hand instead of walking past. He found his voice again, strong, confident, unburdened. And every evening, he came home to Mila with more pride than he had ever felt before. But the most emotional day came when Mila visited Adrian's office. She ran into Jonas's arms with the kind of joy only a child can express, and Adrian saw the pure love between father and daughter. In that moment, he realized he hadn't just offered Jonas a job, he had helped restore a family's future. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support truly keeps stories like this alive. Speech balloon special request, comment below, never underestimate someone's silent strength. And as Jonas walked out of the building that evening, sunlight spilling over him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Not exhaustion. Hope. Real, solid, breathing hope, the kind that grows inside a person when someone finally sees their worth.